Hi. I thought I'd show you some examples of records from my record collection, different themes, and I have always, since I was a wee kid many years ago, been interested in comedy albums. The first comedy albums I bought was obviously a Swedish comedy album because I didn't know that much English then. But then during my early teenage years I started buying the few British comedy albums I could find, and I'll get back later to which they were. And I noticed that my English became, well, improved quite a lot when I started listening to these albums. I have quite a lot of Swedish, obviously, also quite a lot of American comedy albums, some Norwegian, some Danish, and some British. I wish I had more British comedy albums, but they're quite hard to find. I'm not even sure whether so many has been made. But I thought I'd show you some different British comedy albums that I've got here. I have much more, but I will show you like one example of the artist that you can find in my collection. And I thought we'd start with this one. It's well, those of you who are into Douglas Adams knows what this is. This is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Part 2, the restaurant at the end of the universe. It's been a bit worn here. There were 2 LPs made from the radio series, or rather I think they were recorded for the LPs. This is the second one. I still haven't found the first one. They are very hard to find in Sweden. I'm a great fan of Douglas Adams, and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of my absolute favorite books. So I have the radio series on CDs nowadays, the original ones, but it's fun to have this one as well. Okay. Then another favorite is Billy Connolly. This is his first solo album on Transatlantic, in which it's mainly music on this. He would later, well, talk quite badly about his skills as a musician and singer, and I think it's a bit unfair to himself because he's a quite good singer and good musician. And this is the first album, Billy Connolly Live, on the Transatlantic label, and I like it very much, and I think is one of my favorite comedians, Billy Connolly. One of the few that I really laugh out loud, lols, so to speak, when I hear or see on the video. So, great album. Okay, one of my early British comedy albums that I found on a record store, Record Fair, up in Luleå, my former hometown, in 1995, I think. And he had a bunch of great comedy albums, and I bought this was my first Record Fair, and I bought these and a couple of more. But I thought, well, if it's so easy to find these albums, then no problem, I'll wait until later. But it isn't that easy. Anyway, this is a classic British comedy album, and all of you who have some knowledge about British comedy knows what this is. It's the recording of the show Beyond the Fringe with Alan Bennett, Peter Cook, Jonathan Miller and Dudley Moore from 1961 on the Parlophone label, and recorded at the Fortune Theatre London under the supervision of George Martin. It has the black and yellow Parlophone label. Well, George Martin would a year later start doing some other things for Parlophone, which included Four Lads from Liverpool, as well, you know. It's a lovely album, and I like the cover. This could even be a early Beatles album, like 4 handsome young modern men posing on a Parlophone sleeve. Yeah, great. Glorious mono. Okay, well, this isn't the first British comedy album I bought. In 1988, 87, I was 13, 14 years old. Fawlty Towers, At Your Service. This is the third of 4 Fawlty Towers albums. It's a wonderful drawing of John Cleese as Basil Fawlty. This album that was released by the BBC Records in 1982 has the 2 episodes Death and Fire Drill. When I first heard this, I hadn't seen Fawlty Towers on the telly. Imagine that there was a time when Fawlty Towers wasn't being shown on the telly, and that was before we had the VHS cassettes as well. So this was a very good exercise to learn English, because you really wanted to understand everything, even though you couldn't see it. So yeah, this record has meant quite a lot to me when it comes to learning and understanding English. Okay, here's a 1969 Decca album, I Feel a Song Going Off, Marty Feldman. And it has lots of short and longer songs of various styles, and musical director Dennis King was later quite famous in Sweden during the 80s. The Great Bell is obviously the most famous song on this record, and where is it there? Ilford Town Hall, Kensington High Street, Psychedelic Rubbish. Yeah, silly and quite fun. Okay, now over to another Parlophone release from the early 60s, or maybe late 50s, I'm not entirely sure here. Well, it has the black and gold, see, the black and gold Parlophone label that you so eagerly want to see on Please Please Me Beatles album. But this isn't Please Please Me. It's the 2 comedians and singers Michael Flanders and Donald Swan, or Flanders and Swan, at the drop of a hat. They are fairly forgotten today, and not very risky, not very silly, and very stylish, but nice to listen to. Okay, some Monty Python here. David Frost, The Frost Report on England, also on the Parlophone label from 1966, I think. Yeah. Well, John Cleese was a part of this, obviously, and written by, among others, Tim Brooke Taylor, Graham Chapman, Bear Cryer, Terry Jones, Bill Oddie, yeah, who are all of them British comedy legends today. Yep, David Frost. Well, I just mentioned Bill Oddie and Tim Brooke Taylor. That leads us into the goodies. This is the only goodies LP I've found so far. They're not that easy to find here in Sweden. The new goodies LP, including the Funky Gibbon, released on the Bradley's Records label. Not that familiar with that one. Okay. And now over to Tony Hancock. This is Hancock. It's The Wild Man of the Woods and A Sunday Afternoon at Home, British TV and radio comedy classics. Tony Hancock isn't that famous in Sweden because his shows weren't showed or transmitted in Sweden for obvious reasons, but many of the shows were later rewritten by the writers, what are their names again? Alan Simpson and Ray Galton, for the Norwegian comedian Rolf Wesenlund, and it was called Fleksnes. And Fleksnes more or less is a Norwegian version of Hancock. This record was released on the Pi Mixer, the Plum label, in 1960, and it has the original inner sleeve too. That's very fun. And another favorite of mine, Kenneth Williams, is also on this album. I'll put it in later. Okay, let's take a leap into the future. No, not into the future, but from the early 60s to the 1980s. We got Nevermind the Originals. Here's the Heebie-Jeebies, and 439 Golden Greats by the original Heebie-Jeebies. And well, the Heebie-Jeebies were the 80s part of the radio program Radioactive that I recently discovered by downloading them from a website. I really liked it because I never heard of it before. This album is from 1981, and we have quite mean parodies of Michael Jackson, Kenny Rogers, The Eagles, Status Quo, David Bowie, Paul McCartney and the Wings, ABBA, yeah, them too, and so on. Great musical parody, and it's good music as well. Not just good parodies, it's good pop music. Okay, let's continue to some other great music. We have music from the Hoffnung Music Festival concert, Royal Festival Hall, 13th November 1956. This is a old Columbia album with Gerhard Hoffnung music. He was quite an interesting character, Gerhard Hoffnung, and he died quite early, although he felt like a really old man all the time, but he wasn't. On this red Columbia label. I'm not sure when this was used because, it's a British issue. Anyway, Gerhard Hoffnung, musical comedy. Okay, over to a big favorite of mine, maybe the biggest genius of British comedy ever, Spike Milligan, on a record made together with this South African singer and songwriter Jeremy Taylor, who I tried to find albums with, but I haven't been able to find them yet. Alas. But he sings a couple of songs on this LP from 1974, originally released on the Spark record label. But this is a reissue of the Music for Pleasure label, a label that you rarely find that much interesting content on, but here we go. Okay, not Monty Python. This is Monty Python's second album on the Charisma Records. The Charisma label, the third album altogether. The first one was on BBC. Monty Python's previous record. It was the same with Monty Python. I got to know them through the albums in the beginning, because Monty Python wasn't shown on Swedish television in the second half of the 1980s, not before 1989 anyway. And I started buying Monty Python albums in, 87, 88. And this is from the first pressing, because in it you also find a flexi-disc, Teach Yourself Heath, in which you learn how to speak like Edward Heath. Monty Python. Okay. Here's a show that I remember from Swedish television when I was a kid, not the 9 o'clock news. This is the second album they made, Hedgehog Sandwich, with Rowan Atkinson, Mel Smith, Pamela Stephenson and Griff Rhys Jones. This was on the BBC label. Okay, here we have a 10-inch album with Peter Sellers, the best of Peter Sellers, on the Parlophone label. I have a 12-inch album also called the best of Peter Sellers, an American issue on the Angel Records label. It has the same photo of him polishing a car, but the contents is quite different. Not altogether, but almost altogether. Private Eye was, or is, I don't know if it still exists, one of the greatest parody magazines in England, and they used to release these flexi discs, and this is a springtime release with some of these flexi discs collected on an LP. Private Eye presents the Golden Satyricals, the top 10 flexi discs. And as it says on the cover, includes a free facsimile of the Private Eye issue number 1. And that's included here. There. Quite a rare issue and quite interesting. Okay, I'm going to speak about the Goon Show now. Today you can find most of the Goon Show episodes on MP3s. Well, some of them are lost obviously. But they were also released on LPs in the early 60s and late 50s when these episodes were still on the air. And this is another Parlophone issue from 1960, the best of the Goon Shows, number 2, with Peter Sellers, Harry Seacombe and Spike Milligan. I'm a great fan of the Goon Show. It's so silly, it's so silly, it can't be beaten. So this is a great issue. I have a later BBC issue from the 70s too. But the first time I heard of Harry Seacombe and Spike Milligan, I had heard about Peter Sellers before because, well, the Pink Panther movies were quite big in Sweden too. But when I went to my first record fair in 1995 and bought some comedy albums, this was one of the ones I bought. How to Win an Election or Not Lose by Much. Harry Seacombe, Peter Sellers, Spike Milligan. So it's the Goon Show actors and the Goon Show writers, performers, but well, it's written by Leslie Bricusse. I don't know how you pronounce it. Bricusse? I don't know. Anyway, this record was made in 1965, 66, 64 on the Plum Phillips label. So it's the Goons performing, but it's not really the Goons, but still it's quite interesting, like good satire about British politics. Okay, over to maybe a bit of a hopeless Dolls on record. Well, I have a Muppet Show on the LPs, but here we have Spitting Image, Spit in Your Ear, from the 1980s, from 1986 on the Virgin label. I guess you really have to watch it and if you really understand how funny it can be, but still it contains some good material from the show, including some great music parodies like, well, Black Moustache, Hello You Must Be Going, We Got Beers, the ZZ Top parody, and of course the Chicken Song, which became a kind of a parody of a novelty hit that became a hit in itself, the Chicken Song. Okay, I only have 2 more records to show you now. The 2 Ronnies, fairly unknown in Sweden, but they are a bit part of the early pre-Monty Python movement, and they made their own TV show during the 1970s, and also a couple of short films, I think. There are, as far as I know, 4 albums with material from the 2 Ronnies. This is the first one, I think, and I got them all 4, but this is the first one. Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett on the BBC label. Okay, last one. A forerunner of Candid Camera with Jonathan Ralph. Candid Mike, a 10-inch album of the Nixa Pi label. Like, it's like a Candid Camera but with a microphone. So quite fun. I don't know where it's from, but I guess sometime in the 1950s. It was recorded in the 1956, but I'm not sure whether this actual release is from that year. Okay, some examples of British comedy records that I like. Hope you find it somewhat interesting. Bye bye.